Hello and welcome to episode 522 of the HaskinCast Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and I am very excited to be talking to an author on a subject that I find absolutely fascinating. We're going to get into all the things. He is the co-author, I should say, of Connecticut Cryptids. This is Patrick Scalisi. Patrick, how are you?
Hello, how's it going? Doing well tonight.
Excellent. I'm doing great. Thank you. I appreciate you taking some time out of your life to come talk to me about some of the stranger things in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Now, I do have your website and your socials in the show notes, so you guys can go and check out the book while we're talking. Go ahead and buy it while you're at it. Why not? Because this is going to be fascinating. So you're obviously based on the East Coast, which is why you chose Connecticut. Did you find out of curiosity that there's a certain concentration there? Because I would think further east, things probably find more places to hide because we're pretty settled there. We're not really exploring areas now.
Yeah, Connecticut is pretty densely populated, but I feel like we have this interesting balance of, dense population centers, but also lots of very natural areas and, natural beauty areas. We have a lot of state forest, we have a lot of open areas. And so I think that even though we are pretty populous, there's still sort of fun places away from society and away from downtown that you can find in our small state.
Sure. I would imagine there's some good forestry areas,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
some foothills and things to hide in.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely.
I think, from what I hear people saying, and this is one of the things that I kind of do pay attention to in general, I just try to avoid the internet as much as possible. But I do find it fascinating that people come to this with the approach of, well, we would have seen it by now. We would have, proof of this by now. But we've actually explored so little of our planet. And it's not like things stay still
Yep.
and just have a little tag put on them, go, okay, we've looked at this piece of land, there's nothing ever going to happen here again.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think one of the more exciting places that people who are interested in either scientific discovery or cryptozoology or anything like that will be interested to learn about is the world's oceans. There's so much going on in the world's oceans that we don't know about. And I think some of the latest statistics I've seen is that, the oceans cover 75% of the planet, and we have only cataloged somewhere around 10% of the creatures that live in the ocean. So the first time I heard that, it was mind blowing to me. Think about that for a second. 10% of the creatures that live on 75% of the planet. I mean, and that's
Right.
amazing.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think there's another thing that goes along with this. Let's just take the example of Nessie, because people
Mhm.
they go to Scotland, they hope to get the sighting, and then they're like, well, nobody's seen anything for a couple of years. The loch is pretty big,
Yep.
but I wouldn't doubt that there are all kinds of underground caves and things that lead into other parts that go far beyond the loch. And you take that concept to the ocean and think about what's under the continents. So we might look at the ocean on the surface, you've got land and then you have water. But what cave systems, what, giant open caverns and things are underneath of the land. So there's really even more ocean than that.
Yeah. And, to kind of touch on the other point that you were making, we had a question at the last presentation that Val, who is my co-creator of the book, the last presentation that we gave, somebody asked us, do you think we're going to lose this sense of mystery with the world, given that we have so much surveillance and drones and everything like that? And the example that I like to give is that one of the stories in the book is about this incident that happened in 2020 about this beefalo named Buddy the Beefalo. And a beefalo is a cross between a cow and a buffalo. It's bred for, meat purposes. And this one particular animal escaped as it was being brought to a slaughterhouse in Connecticut, and it escaped into the woods. And what was so fascinating about this story is it was like watching folklore happen in real time. Like if you tried to make folklore happen, you couldn't do it. You need this weird alchemy of ingredients. And it just so happened that this ticked all the boxes. That this thing happened in 2020 during the pandemic when we were all kind of starved for something to talk about. And it was like watching folklore happen in real time. People were describing Buddy as a cryptid as this whole thing was happening. So Buddy escapes, and the police are trying to use drones and surveillance and all this technology at their disposal to try to find him and bring him back, and they couldn't. It took them. He was on the lam for months, and when they finally caught him, they caught him in a cow pasture, just because it was spring and he wanted to cavort with the cows. So it was kind of simple biology that trapped him in the end, and all these other things that man was trying to do to get him didn't work. So I think there's still
Wow.
room for, for plenty of mystery out there.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of COVID, that would have been a very interesting time for anything that tends to hide from
Oh yeah.
society, because with society not being out, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I
Yeah.
got all this open land,
Yep.
I can roam around again. And I think
Yep.
there would have been some temptation for creatures to venture out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, before we get too far into this, for those who don't know, we should probably define what a cryptid is so that they can understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the way that we define a cryptid is as a creature that is believed to exist, but has not yet been proven to exist. And I believe that's based off the Merriam-Webster definition of the word.
Mhm.
And when we talk about cryptozoology, we are talking about the search for and study of cryptids. So we find that a lot of people kind of inherently know what a cryptid is, even if they're not sure what that specific word means. If you give that explanation to them, they'll say something like, "Oh, like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster," and then the two things come together, and it's like, yes, exactly.
Mhm.
So, yep.
I think there's a I don't know how this falls into that category. I don't think it does, but what I wonder about sometimes is there thing or are there things that we've a great host things that we've seen that we may think or claim to exist, and then we just don't see them for a long time, like say the coelacanths. I mean, that was thought
Yeah.
to be extinct for what, millions of years, and all of a sudden they found a couple that were alive in great shape. And
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, again, with as big as the ocean especially is, I would imagine that things might have survived or might be out there that we just don't see, but we do know are real.
Yeah, so you hit on an interesting point, and this is something I think that people who are interested in cryptozoology have struggled with since the very beginning. In the presentation that Val and I give, we talk about this group that was formed in the 1980s called the International Society of Cryptozoology, or the ISC for short. And they also grappled with this idea when they tried to put like guardrails around what they wanted to study.
Mhm.
And so it could be creatures that have not been discovered yet, creatures that people think exist that haven't been proven to exist. It could be creatures like what you said that are thought to be extinct that may still be with us. So the coelacanth is a great example. Ancient fish that was thought to have gone extinct and were caught off the coast of South Africa in the 1930s. Another example is the Tasmanian tiger. Australia being so big and so sparsely populated, could there be pockets of them out there where people just don't go? So that's another aspect that people feel could fall under that cryptozoology umbrella. And then another kind of area is the appearance of animals or creatures in places where they're not supposed to be. And here in Connecticut, we have a kind of notable example of that, and it's mountain lions. So our state Department of Environment says that there's not a breeding population of mountain lions in Connecticut, but people report dozens and dozens of sightings every year There was one struck on the highway a couple years back. So clearly they're passing through, but it creates this fierce debate of, well, we know mountain lions are real creatures, we know they exist, but we're being told that they're not supposed to be here, and people are seeing them or think they're seeing them, and are they here or aren't they here? So that could also kind of be of interest to a cryptozoologist. And this is something that's debated in Pennsylvania. We learned as well about the mountain lions and creatures in other states as well. So yeah.
Would a mountain lion be considered a cryptid?
Well, I don't think so. Well, I mean, in that context, possibly, depending on how one defies cryptozoology.
Right.
But you know, I think we know that that's a mountain lion, a catamount, a puma is something that exists, but it's not supposed to be here in Connecticut or in other
Right.
parts of the
Yeah.
Northeast, so to speak. So,
Well, and that's got to be a hard thing to define because with
yep,
climate change,
yep,
available food
yeah.
sources, I mean, animals are going to migrate.
Oh
Birds do
yeah.
that on the norm, but other species certainly have to do that too that aren't taken care of by humans.
Yep, and another example of that could be like Kiowa wolves. Again, wolves are like regionally extinct in the Northeast, but wolf populations had bred with coyotes, so we have this sort of distinct species of Kiowa wolf here in parts of the Northeast. So, yeah, things like that happen for all kinds of reasons: climate change, human settlement,
Mhm.
you name it.
So if you found, for example, that there was a pack of mountain lions in Connecticut that just, they nestled into a cave, they've been breeding for a while, and now they are part of your culture,
Yeah.
would they come off the cryptid list?
Yeah, I would think so. And I think we would also be able to look back at a time when they were cryptids, and that sort of becomes part of the larger story and lore about them. I think you can sort of say the same thing about something like Bigfoot. Like if we or if scientists went out tomorrow and found definitive proof of Sasquatch, or had a verifiable sighting of Sasquatch, then he would cease to be a cryptid. We would know that he exists at that time,
Mhm.
but we would be able to look back at a period, at a very long period, where he was a cryptid, and that becomes part of its whole overall lore.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, since you went in that direction, let's talk about Bigfoot because
Right.
I think one of the challenges that would be faced is romanticism, right?
Mhm.
So take the megalodon, for example. I think the popularity of movies like Jurassic Park and especially with the more recent ones with the big sea monsters, that there's got to be a romanticism about things like the megalodon. We want to believe that it still exists because it's a fantastic creature. A 60-foot great white shark, you
Yeah.
want to see that. You
Yeah,
don't,
yeah,
but you
yeah.
do. Uh,
Yeah.
when you
Yes.
think about a blue whale, it's not that unreasonable to think that a shark that big could be out there, but we
Yeah.
don't see them on the norm, whereas we do see blue whales. So
Yep.
there's probably like this romanticized element of wanting to believe versus trying to find some kind of verified proof of current existence.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, just look at the giant squid. There were questions about whether that existed for
Mhm.
decades. And even today we only have a couple of sort of verified bits of footage of that. And
Mhm.
yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. There's that romanticism there. And yeah, we when we were preparing the book, we definitely approached it from an area of skepticism. Um, for my part, I was interested in the storytelling aspect of it.
Mhm.
But as we were saying earlier, there's things that you just can't explain, or things that we haven't learned yet.
It's kind of a process of elimination, right?
Yeah.
You take the evidence that you get, you explain away what you can, and then you have to deal with what remains.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even for some of these, some of the stories in the book, um, that don't have clear explanations, I've heard people try to explain things away, and it's like, this is too many steps to get to that explanation. You
Right.
know, what's that saying about how, the most, the most likely explanation is often the most, you know, verifiable. I'm probably misstating that, but
Well, yeah,
so,
I see that, but I also tend to think that part of the problem is a little bit of our own ego, right?
mm,
We assume we know everything. We assume we understand everything about science, and we assume that we know all the creatures in the world, even though
yeah,
we fully admitted we don't. But there's some arrogance to
yeah,
that it couldn't possibly be real because we would have known about it already. And going back to the example of Bigfoot,
yep,
how many people have said, well, where's the carcasses? How come we don't have anything on video? There's millions of videos. And well before AI of
yeah,
and audio recordings of creature sounds that make absolutely no sense. But then we've got the Hollywood aspect of it. We know what Hollywood can create for audio samples, for example. I mean,
yeah, oh
listen
yeah.
to Star Wars or monster movies from the 40s. Where do you find your comfort level in the world when it comes to verifying that kind of evidence when you don't have physical proof, you have some sort of analyzable documentation?
Mhm.
It's got to be really challenging nowadays.
Yeah, speaking for myself, like I said, I definitely approach it from a place of skepticism. Um, like I want to see the evidence that you have to present. And I do want it to be, um, fairly verifiable, I would say, like, or peer reviewed or something like that. But I would also like to think that, that I am keeping an open mind. Like, I firmly do believe there are things out there that we can't explain,
Mhm.
and maybe, we'll never be able to explain. But I do also want to see uh some evidence of what's being presented. And so that's kind of the balance that I try to strike. But
Mhm.
that's just me, and um, I would never suggest that someone else approach their beliefs that way.
Sure. Well, you have to go with what feels right to you,
Yeah.
you know. One thing I do find a little frustrating is the general public view. I mean, there's always people that
Mhm.
make sarcastic comments on any kind of post or anything, but
Yeah.
to divert a little bit, because I can't find a good example with cryptids, I'll go with
Mhm.
crop circles.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have these shapes that appear. Everybody's mystified. What's going on? How are these happening? And then two guys come out and say, "Oh, you just take a board and you do this and you step on it and you go around in this pattern or
Yep.
whatever." And people just bought into it. But what they didn't bother to explain was the electromagnetic field, the little bits of uh, what are they, like the little metal fragments that are left
Mhm.
behind that there was no explanation for. The people at MIT couldn't replicate it.
Yeah.
But people go, whenever you talk about it, there's always that person that's like, oh, it's just two guys with a board. We know that that's not real.
Yeah.
Does that enter into your world at all? Do you have to deal with that kind of just dismissive? It's frustrating to me, I guess, because
Mhm.
it dampens the idea of people wanting to find real answers and understand what the truth is,
Mhm.
whatever it may be,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think I totally get what you're saying, and there's definitely that derision that comes from certain quarters. But I also think sometimes some of those more vocal people can be their own worst enemies when they don't want to acknowledge evidence to the contrary.
Mhm.
And I think that all comes with having an open mind about things, uh, that you have to be prepared to um, to be wrong in a certain sense. And I can go out tomorrow and find out that, something that I included in the book that I, thought I had a definitive origin for, that there's new evidence or other evidence has been found. And then I have to reevaluate that belief and my stance on that thing. I think I think people do themselves a disservice when they sort of dig in and refuse to to acknowledge anything to the contrary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. But
Yeah.
I would imagine that you do run into quite a number of skeptics.
Yeah, I feel like we do. And but we I feel like we run into all kinds of people. And
Mhm.
I sort of go back to that struggle that the ISC was working with when they first came together and was trying to define cryptozoology, and how it's kind of a big tent thing. And I think that there are places for people of many different viewpoints within this sort of cryptozoology community. You could have people like me who are interested in the storytelling aspect and the folklore aspect of it. You could have people who, and I don't mean this in any kind of derogatory way, you have people who are the true believers,
Mhm.
who firmly believe that there are things out there. You could have people who are very interested in the archaeological and biological aspects of these things from a very scientific perspective. And I think there's room for all of those viewpoints
Mhm.
within this community, as long as we all keep an open mind about, how things can change when we're presented with new evidence. And so yeah, I feel like we meet people from all different kinds of viewpoints, and uh, everyone's gotten along fairly well, I think,
Mhm.
so far.
That's yeah, that's an excellent way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think too, there's those people that, and I fully understand this, that just don't want to believe the world is any different than exactly
Yeah.
the way they think it is. They don't want to know there's things out there. Part of that could be fear-based too, because if you
Yeah.
don't know what you're up against, you really can't defend yourself or protect your family, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
could see that side of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Humans have always had um an innate fear of the other. It's part of probably our survival instincts.
Mhm.
Long ago it was, what's lurking on the edges of civilization outside of our community. And today it's what we don't know, or things that don't conform to our current worldview. So
Right. I
yeah.
mean, to be fair, if I were out in the wilderness and I saw an 11-foot creature whose
Yeah.
bicep was as big as my head, I would probably be a little terrified.
Yeah,
But to be
same.
fair, same if I saw a lion or a hippopotamus or anything else out in
Yeah,
the
yep.
wild.
Yeah.
So you co-authored this with Valerie Ruby Oman. How did you guys work together on the book? 'Cause I find it difficult to work with other people. So I'm
Yeah.
always curious how people work together on a project.
Yeah, so I did all of the writing. She did all of the artwork and the kind of art direction for the book. Um, I had started doing the research again in 2020. I knew a couple of the more notable stories from Connecticut folklore, things like the Black Dog of the Hanging Hills in Meriden, Connecticut, things like the Winstead Wild Man in Winstead, Connecticut. And I kind of got to wondering what other stories were out there.
Mhm.
And I figured I would start doing research on the topic. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information at that point, whether I was going to make a blog or a website or something. But I started contacting historical societies throughout the state to see if they had any stories that they wanted to share from their communities. And as I started getting responses back, it was like, oh wow, I'm getting like a lot of information here. A lot of people have stories to share. A lot of communities have stories to share. There's like enough here to fill a book.
Mhm.
And I was like, somebody must have done that already. And I couldn't find that anyone had. People had done, ghost stories. We have lots of, fantastic ghost lore in Connecticut.
Oh yeah.
And people had done like weird Connecticut and things like that. But it didn't seem like there was anything focused specifically on creatures and cryptids. And so Val and I were friends. We had known each other for years beforehand. She's a working artist. And I asked her at a gathering that we were at if she would be interested in illustrating this book with me. and she was thrilled with the idea. And so she came aboard, and that's sort of how we divided the labor. So um, each chapter has its own illustration, and there's also some spot illustrations throughout the book for the different regions of the state. She designed the cover and our logo and all things like that. So yeah, I feel like we had a very good working relationship. We tried to be pretty open about what we were working on and our progress on things. So it was a first for me too, because I feel like I also like to keep my own projects to myself, but yeah, in this instance it worked out very well. So
I think the key is that communication that you were talking
yeah.
about. If you have an open dialogue, I'm falling a little bit behind. It's going to take me longer to get this done than I thought, and things like
Yeah.
that. It's great if you don't have that. They're like, well, I'm going to try and make it up and hope the other one doesn't find out. That's when
Yeah.
you run into problems, you know. So to have somebody that you feel you can trust and be comfortable working with, that's really the key to making it happen.
Yeah, yeah. And in talking about it afterwards, after the book was done and out, I think we both independently were like, "Oh, I don't want to let the other one down," but we never
Yeah.
said it to each other, and
Mhm.
so that kind
Right.
of worked in our favor.
Well, but you know what? I like that because that kind of ethic a lot of times is what makes people get it done. It will
Yeah.
drive you because if you're doing it for yourself, if you're not doing it under contract, for example, it's well, you know, there's really no rush. I can get to it. I've got this coming out, so I'm going to step away from it. There's not necessarily a drive, or you have those moments where it takes a back seat. When you're pushing yourself because you have someone else that is involved in it, it can speed things up or make you, you know, find that extra gear to get it done.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
As long as you're not compromising quality over time, then it's fine.
Yes, and I 100% agree. At one point we did decide we were going to go the self-publishing route, because we did want to keep kind of complete creative control on it, especially given that we were an author and an artist working together.
Right.
And so yeah, my goal from the beginning was that I want to put out something that's of high quality that's going to stand on a bookshelf in a bookstore alongside things that came from indie presses, that came from big five publishers,
Right.
that looks like it was professionally done. That was one of the biggest things for me.
And you guys have a couple of appearances coming up.
Yeah, yeah. So we are going to be at the Barnes and Noble in Danbury, Connecticut, this Sunday. We'll be vending at a few events throughout September and October. I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you, but spooky season tends to be busy for us.
What?
So we always post about our appearances or events that we're going to be at on our Instagram account. That's kept most up to date on where we're going to be and what we're doing and stuff like that.
Okay, now I have your Instagram as Patrick underscore Scalisi. Do you guys have another one?
Yeah, so we have an account for the book, and it's just at CT Cryptids.
Oh, okay. Excellent. I want to make sure I get that in the show notes for everybody. Now you have also another book out. This one's called The Key to the Universe. This one, what's the inspiration on this one?
So I had this idea, I was thinking about the kind of typical character archetypes and, you know, the ways that the traditional hero story runs, where you have the young hero and the wise old man. And I don't know where this idea came from, but the initial idea was sparked by what if these two were reversed? What if the wise old man wasn't so wise, if he was the sort of impetuous one, and the young man was the wise one? And that's where the spark of the idea started. And and I started building this story around it about this young man named Quinn, who is sort of very level-headed, and his grandfather or great grandfather Abe, who is the more impetuous one. He's kind of gotten to that point in his life where he doesn't care. He doesn't care so much about things and what's happening to him. He is he's a bit freewheeling, and so Quinn is often the voice of reason in this relationship, and Abe is often the more impetuous one. And so Abe owns this antique shop on the one of the Martian moons, and one day this artifact called the Key to the Universe lands in their shop, and it sort of puts them in this whole situation where all of a sudden the Martian government is after them and the Martian mafia is after them, and they're racing to try to figure out what this thing is.
Interesting. I do like the idea of a reverse perspective.
Mm,
Like I often say, if we the reason that we follow the rebels in Star Wars is because that's the group that we're told to follow,
mm,
right? We're told that the Empire are the bad guys, the rebels are the good guys. We want to get behind them. We're given romantic storylines and all that about these characters. But if you were to tell that same story, but from the perspective of the Empire, who thinks they're the good guys, who
yeah,
think
yeah.
that they're the ones saving the universe, that would be the story we would follow. And it would just be amazing to be able to look at it from both perspectives. So I like when somebody just looks through the looking glass at something a little bit differently. That always interests me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And it was interesting to do the characters too, and um, yeah, to see where each one's, making that the character each one where it took them.
Did you find, do you tend to, well, this being a fiction, did you tend to work with an outline or how did you develop it?
So for a long, long time, I was very, very anti-outline. I felt like it ruined the spontaneity and that pure creative energy of just writing. And as I was working on longer pieces, this wasn't the first book length manuscript that I had finished. It was the my first novel that was published. But, as I was working on projects of this length, I kept finding that I was getting myself into trouble. And so this was probably the last book that I wrote without an outline, or the last story of this length that I wrote without an outline. And things that I've written since then, nothing else that's been published. But things that I've written since then, I have written with an outline, and I have found that, to my pleasant surprise, that it didn't kind of kill that creative buzz or that spontaneity or anything like that. And even though I was kind of doing a rough outline, and I try to kind of just limit myself to like maybe a couple bullet points of what's going to happen in a
Yeah.
chapter. I don't
Mhm.
want to go too deep. But I found that even when I was doing that, that I was still finding surprises as I was writing. So I think that was all a very pleasant surprise for me.
Isn't it great when you just get locked in that creative zone and things
Yeah.
just kind of start taking shape in new directions without your initial idea?
Yep.
But that was the problem I had working with an outline with my book is that I found that it was developing a lot more. I was coming up with new characters, new situations, and I'm like, none of this is on the outline. And so I switched. I found I was rewriting, spending far more time rewriting the outline,
Mm,
and so I just went to kind of bullet points like this needs to happen around the time I get to this, and made sure that I at least kept that part of the structure
yeah. Yep.
because the rest was just developing in ways that I didn't anticipate. And as much as I loved it, from a production standpoint, it was really frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to keep it very, very broad strokes. Like, okay, chapter one, like these three things have to happen in this chapter.
Mhm.
Chapter two, building from chapter one, these three things have to happen. And like kind of that's it. Like I don't want to go
Right.
too deep. And I
Mhm.
found that that is a method that I feel works for me right now. Could change 5 or 10 years down the line,
Sure.
and it's not a method that works for everyone. Everyone has to find their own creative way, so to speak.
But that keeps it open for those other ideas to come through and be able to
Yeah.
be a part of the story.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So getting back to cryptids, though, I'm curious, what is the line, I guess, that would be drawn between, say, something that would be considered cryptid and something that might be considered, say, alien? For example, we had, what was it, in Peru, I think, we had those really small bodies that were found that had, complete organs in them, and they've been analyzed and undetermined, the last I heard. But
Yep.
that might be something that might be considered not a cryptid. Where's the line?
Yeah, so we go back to that kind of big tent idea of what is considered a cryptid, and you're struggling with putting those guardrails around cryptozoology. And some people consider aliens and UFOs to fall firmly into that category. Other people don't. Some people feel that ghosts fall into the cryptid category. Other people
Ooh.
don't, or things like that. And so this was something that we needed to sort of answer for ourselves as well as when we were preparing the book. So the guidelines that we sort of set for ourselves was that we wanted to share stories that involved creatures.
Mm.
And that was sort of where we drew a soft line. And I say a soft line because I think there's probably places in the book where we pushed a little past that as well. And so we do have a couple of chapters in the book in which the creatures would fall into that alien category. One that I'm thinking of specifically is a story from Old Saybrook, Connecticut. And it's about these creatures called the Old Saybrook Blockheads, which would definitely be, of extraterrestrial origin. But since there was a creature involved, and the individual saw them and saw that they were these strange creatures, um, we felt that it fell within our guidelines enough to include it in the book. But we didn't feel that, say, like UFO sightings um, were close enough to fit within our guidelines, to say nothing of the fact that there's so many, and
Right.
they sort of fall into a number of broad categories that don't involve creatures.
Mhm.
And so that's how we kind of defined it. The same thing with ghosts. There's a couple of ghost adjacent stories in the book, but they involve creatures. One is there's a headless horseman story from Canton, but he has a very distinctive horse that he rides on.
Mm.
So we felt that that was close enough to include within our guidelines. Um, we also included, like, we felt that like fey creatures were close enough to include as well. So we have a
Mm.
couple chapters that deal with those kind of things, because again, some people feel that fey creatures and or like mythical creatures like unicorns, dragons, things of that nature fall into that cryptid category, and other
Right.
people don't. So for us it was, is there a creature component to the story?
That, yeah, I think ghosts would be a hard sell for me because they're
Mhm.
not tangible. They're not a
Yep.
physical entity
Yep.
as much as something, like a fairy, for example. And
Yep. Yep.
interestingly, there have been a couple of very convincing, and I want to say before AI, very convincing fairy videos that I'm like, I can only say I've never seen one. I can't say that anything I haven't seen doesn't exist because I haven't seen it.
Yep.
I,
Yeah.
I try to be optimistic and open-minded about possibility. And I mean, if they're fake videos, they're incredibly well done, I would say.
Yep. Yeah.
But you look at the Patterson Bigfoot video, and I would say the same thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Considering how well that's been analyzed and the muscle movement, even if if it is a suit, the muscle movement doesn't match a human in a suit, and
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of thing. I think the benefit is that we do have some great tools nowadays to be able to analyze the evidence, but the evidence fakery is also getting so good that it's still a tough. I just think that's always going
Yeah.
to be the most difficult part of it is proof.
Yeah. And there's a great story from Connecticut that kind of falls into what you were saying, like about how I haven't seen them. That doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right.
So, in Connecticut, we have the Mohegan indigenous people, and they have within their cosmology, they have both giants and little people. And the little people of their belief is the Makiawisug. And we would say that this, I think if you're a non-indigenous person, you would say this is part of their mythology.
Mhm.
But if you are an indigenous person, especially if you are a a member of the Mohegan tribe, there is not a question of whether the Makiawisug are real. It is um, part of their belief system, as I understand it. There are several chiefs and medicine people of the Mohegan tribe who were said to have personal relationships with the Makiawisug and who saw them and conversed or interacted with them. But what I think is absolutely fantastic is that several years ago there was a proposed housing development. I don't know. I think it was near the Mohegan tribal lands in Connecticut. And the tribe was very strongly opposed to this development because it was going to be made in one of the places where the Makiawisug traditionally lived. And so you can find, this is all a matter of public record. You can go online and find a lot of the correspondence. There are letters back and forth between the Mohegan tribe and the U.S. HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development,
Mhm.
talking about how this land can't be developed because the Makiawisug live there.
Wow.
And like on official like government letterhead and all of this
Mhm.
other stuff. And as far as I know, the Mohegan tribe won. The development didn't
Wow.
go forward. And so you have this instance where this thing that I think, a lot of people might write off as mythology, had a very real impact on the real world. And, just because we can't see it or haven't seen it or haven't seen proof of it, um, doesn't mean it's not out there. And I absolutely love that story, not the least of which, like I said, because you can find these official government documents
Right.
talking about the Makiwis.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's perfectly reasonable to think that we have had races that there are just no traces of. I
Mhm.
mean, even in our lifetime, we know about the disappearance of the Mayans. That is uncontested, that these people were here one minute, gone the next, meals still on the table, no explanation. And so, why would that be the only race that's ever happened to? You know,
Yep.
they're
Yeah.
they're
Or yeah.
they're
Or one of my
completely
favorite stories from history, Roanoke. You know,
Roanoke, yeah.
like that's a great one. And yeah, exactly.
Although that one clue really still bothers me, where they left the name of what could be the name of a town that they went to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one thing that I'm like, I want to know what that means.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, that's what happens. You put people somewhere, you come back a year later, it's not like they're going to be there.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, think about now they're questioning the age of everything in Egypt because of the water lines on the Sphinx, and now all this new stuff they've discovered underground with lidar, and now they're taking lidar and looking everywhere and going, what else don't we know about? And
Yep. Yep. Yep.
we've got underground cities that we're discovering. It seems like every other month there's a new underground long lost city that we're
Yep.
finding. Where are those people?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know,
like things like, like places in the Middle East, like the Fertile Crescent and that birthplace of humanity. We're talking about things that are so old.
yeah.
It just our brains almost can't comprehend these spans of time. Here in Connecticut, we have the Yale Peabody Museum, which is a pretty notable museum of like natural history and
Mhm.
and things like that. And they just reopened after a long renovation, and I went, and you just see these creatures and these fossils and even remains of our ancestors, the various homo species. And you're like, how long ago was this? And like, I can't even, the mind staggers.
Mhm.
you know or like you were talking before about the blue whale. um the size of some of these fossils
Yeah.
and like what you would do if you saw something like this in real life, it's just unbelievable.
Well, and before we wrap up, I want to ask you about this real quick. I would imagine giants might tend to fall under the cryptozoological head. That's hard to say. That headline. Um, I know that a lot of the photos that we've seen are obviously doctored, but there is a history. There's texts that talk about these giant, 17, 18 foot tall people. I don't know that we're talking about the same unit of measurement that
Yeah,
we look at.
yep.
A foot today is the same unit of measurement that they're talking about as a foot. So I have to take that into account. But obviously, whatever size the people are writing this are, they're saying that these people are much bigger, like
Yeah.
frighteningly bigger. So I do think, much like these letters that you're talking about, there is some evidence that there was a race of much larger people on the planet, at least at one time.
Yeah, and yeah, so I would agree that giants fall into this category. We have a couple of, again, giant stories in the book. There's again one from Mohegan tradition, because everything is about balance. So you have the
Right.
little people and you have the giant people. And the if I remember correctly, one of the main giants is married to the head of the little people, because you need that balance in
Mm.
nature.
Right.
And so we do have a couple stories in like that in the book, and I agree with you. I think they fall into that category for sure. And yeah, I think I don't know this with certainty off the top of my head, but there's been work done about how heights have changed over the years and how even in the last what 2 or 500 years, how the average heights of people have changed. And so to see someone outside of that kind of median range, yeah, would be alarming,
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's so many things that go along with that because larger body requires a heavier food source.
Yep.
And
Yep. Oh
that
yeah.
I think that's one of the big arguments about the megalodon is that they would have died out just from lack of available food to sustain what it would take to run a 60-foot body.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which I could understand that. I mean, that argument does make sense, but it also doesn't mean that something didn't necessarily survive. We just don't know.
Yeah, yep, exactly. We don't know what we don't know.
So before we go, you have one other item that you showed me earlier that you were published in, which is really exciting. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, at the end of 2023, the publisher who put out Key to the Universe did a short story anthology called The Take Back.
Mhm.
And what it was a series of stories from people reclaiming identities. So it was really seeking out stories about or by marginalized communities, and sort of taking back um, stories that might have been told about them that didn't necessarily reflect them in a way that accurately reflected their experience. And so I had this idea to submit. I love the Gothic vampire story Carmilla, which is a little less well known than Dracula,
Mhm.
but I believe was published before Dracula. It's
Oh,
about a woman vampire, and so I took that and I reframed it in a as a way of looking at this woman who was a doctor, who so she's in a profession that wasn't ever afforded to women at the time. And on top of that, she is a queer woman. And so that's kind of two strikes against her, and how this these things about her um may have influenced the stories that came after her, villainizing her as this, creature of the night. And so that was the idea I had, was to retell the Carmilla story from her perspective. And again, I want to emphasize that I have, a lot of, I'm coming from a place of privilege. I'm not a queer person. So I worked with members of the queer community to, have you know, um, yeah, sensitivity readings done and, have it
Nice.
looked at to make sure that I was getting it right. And yeah, it was accepted for the collection. And yeah, it's just a fantastic book of stories of all kinds of things of that nature. So,
That's great. I really like that you did that. I think that's a fantastic way to approach it because you want to be able to have a story that's accessible to everybody, that people don't have to get distracted with the political side of things when there's no intention of that in the story whatsoever.
yeah, yeah, and again, you don't know what you don't know. So,
Right.
I could be saying or writing something innocently enough. That's not part of my experience, and so, yeah, it was important to me to do that, and so, yeah, I've actually Val was a great help in getting me introduced to people who wanted to read it and wanted to work with me to make sure that I got it right.
It just occurs to me as you're saying this, it's kind of interesting how popular the vampire and zombie cultures are in the cinematic world.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, it's there's so many different types of vampires and different types of zombies. There's the fast ones, the slow ones, the
yep,
dumb
yeah.
ones, you know. It's amazing to me. And then we look at the world of cryptozoology, and it's like there are so many fascinating things in the real world that we're exploring
Yep, yep.
that I don't think we need to make anything up at this point. Like we've got enough real world stuff that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's true, but oh, what's the fun in that, you know?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate your time. I'm really excited about these books, and hope that everybody that's in your area will come and see you this Sunday and on your other engagements. I've got the links to the website and all that good stuff in the show notes, so check it out, you guys. Also, I would like to leave the audience with this. Um, it's a pretty wild and unexplored world that we live in, and while we're very comfortable with the things that we do know, there's still so much that we don't. And I would just say keep an open mind.
Yeah,
If somebody says they've seen something, don't immediately jump to the conclusion that they didn't, because that's what keeps people from talking. And
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
keeps us from learning about things that we could know about that could be very real or at least deserve exploration,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah.
So
And thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. It was great to talk with you, Scott.
thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Well, hang on for me for one more second, if you would, Patrick.
Yep.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, so you guys know, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday is Deep Purple Smoke on the podcast. Wednesdays is the HaskinCast podcast with the occasional Saturday or Sunday episode, depending on what's going on. I do have a review coming up fairly soon for Cherry Red Records that I'm excited to bring you guys. Otherwise, we'll be back next week for another episode of the HaskinCast podcast. Cheers.